Welcome back to Les Schwab Tire Center's Outdoor GPS, presented by Fisherman's Marine and Outdoor. Now, it's real time.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for watching the show this morning. We truly do appreciate your support and the opportunity to check in with Bob Kratzer. Now, Bob, looks like you're in the midst of rolling around, dude, so I want you to be safe. Please pay attention. Are you driving?
No, my daughter's driving.
Okay, thank goodness, all right, because the FCC would be all over me for putting you in that situation. First off,
my daughter's driving. We're headed to a college graduation.
Okay, very good. Bob, first off, thanks for spending some time with us this morning. Obviously, he's a very busy man, everyone. But I wanted to talk to you about twitching for silvers. We've talked about it in the past here on the show. You're one of the originals that came up with this years ago now. But it's also turned into arguably one of the best ways to go after silvers, if not the best way to go after them in tributaries specifically. What is some of the advice that you could share with our viewers that are out there when you're talking about the actual technique of actually doing this correctly?
So, I mean, I watch a lot of guys doing it. Obviously, I teach a lot of clients doing it. And a couple of things that I noticed more than anything. To understand that the whole idea behind twitching is what entices the fish is the fall of the jig, not the rise. Even though we're twitching the jig up and making it rise, it's the fall that is intriguing them. That's when they're coming and biting it. And so two things happen. One is if you twitch too high, you're creating so much slack in your line, you have a hard time feeling them. But a lot of people reel too much. That's the biggest thing, is they reel way too much. So if you twitch up and then you drop your rod and then you reel all the slack, your jig's not falling. If you twitch up and then you hold your rod up and then you slowly drop it, your jig's not really falling. So the idea behind it is just a rhythm. It should be like a bump, 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 bump. That should be your kind of rhythm. And it's a short twitch. I start from the water and I go to about my eyes. Now, some people say, "Well, you're short, so that's not very far." But the idea is you're keeping your rod kind of in a low profile. You don't want to jig so high. You want to just pop it up, and as soon as you pop it up, immediately drop your rod right back to the water. What that does, and if you're doing it properly, you will create what I call line hang. And when I say line hang, is when you drop your rod, if you're using a braided line, which is what we use mostly now, your line will actually hang in the air above your rod tip. So you'll drop your rod, your line hangs in the air, and your line is completely slack. When it's completely slack, that's allowing your jig to free fall. And that's one of the reasons why you want to keep control of your jig and control of your twitch by not doing it too big. So it's kind of a short, 2.5 foot long, little short chop. Just pop, 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 pop. Every time you're popping, you're dropping that rod back down, making sure that you have line hang. If you don't have the line hang, you're not in the game, is what I say.
And
that's super important.
The line hang is what you was mentioning, is when you force that rod tip back down, there's actually line still in the air above your rod tip, correct?
Correct, exactly.
And you're forcing that rod tip back down. So it's the pop, pop, and getting that rod tip back down. You're not letting the rod impede that line, that braided line, your main line at all, correct?
Correct, exactly correct. And it's not so much as a force. When you say force it down, it's not so much a force. I leave my rod very limber in my hand. I'm not gripping the rod tight. I'm holding it very loosely in my hand. What I'm doing is twitching up with my wrist and then allowing my wrist to just fall right back down to the starting point. So I'm not pushing my rod down. I'm just dropping my wrist and allowing my rod to fall.
Perfect.
Right? As opposed to pushing it. One of the things you'll find that when you're twitching like this, if you've got a death grip on your rod, it is not going to take you long before your forearm is going to be killing you. Right? So hold that rod loosely in your hand. It's most of a wrist action, right? Don't hold it hard, okay? And then so you're going to cast out, and then you're going to, as soon as it hits the water, I start my twitch. Now, there are a couple of holes. If you're fishing a hole that you know is like better than 12 or 15 feet deep, then I might allow my jig to sink a little bit. But for the most part, I don't. As soon as it hits the water, I start to twitch. And then it's based on my water conditions is how I'm going to fish that, right? So whether I reel a lot, reel a little bit, don't reel at all, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But a quarter of a turn is your general speaking idea of what you're going to do on your reel, okay? Most of the time I set myself up so I'm casting slightly across and down to the fish. There are certain situations where you can cast up to the fish or above you and bring it to you. As a jig manufacturer and one that supports those, we love that because you tend to snag on the bottom a lot.
Good point.
All right. So to keep you from snagging on the bottom a lot, try to set yourself up where you are slightly above the fish. And the other reason that I like to do this, and some people say, well, I don't know about that, but this is simply my opinion and something I believe in. When you're twitching like this, we're triggering a feeding reaction. And what we're triggering and what we're trying to imitate is a squid or a shrimp. So I tell clients, hey, you're throwing upstream and you're bringing it back. And I say, in what world does a squid or a shrimp swim at the thing that's about ready to eat it?
Right.
It's always trying to get away from it, right? So when you throw it down and across and you're jigging away, you're triggering that aggressive reaction for those fish to look up there and see it trying to get away. That triggers their reaction to go and get it. And so I always set myself up slightly above my position.
Well, everyone, I hope you paid attention to that. A couple of things I know that I took from it is the instantaneous twitching once the jig actually hits the water and not casting it upriver. Although, like you mentioned, there are situations where you would cast upriver and bring it back to you, but very limited in overall in what it is that you're teaching your clients.
Most of those spots are in behind log jams where you're like in dead calm water.
Right.
Or sometimes like in small tributaries, you know, fish are rolling up in behind some logs that are rolling up in a section where I can't set myself up to get below it, above them, right? The only way I can cast at them to get around debris or structure in the river is to cast up. All right, so I'll cast up in those scenarios, right? But if anywhere and everywhere that I possibly can, I am definitely going to cast angled downstream.
Gotcha. Okay, real quickly, then, this is pretty simple when you're talking about the type of gear that you're utilizing for this technique. Rod and reel combination. I remember one of the interviews that we had, you kind of boggled a lot of people's minds when you said that you like to have 50-pound braid instead of, say, a 30-pound, which maybe more people might associate with this style of fishing. Can you explain why having a little bit heavier of a main line is an advantage as opposed to a thinner version?
A little bit of that is that, so, you know, we look at braid and we look at, a lot of people look at braid and they look at the strength of the braid, 50-pound, right? But when you look at that, what is the diameter of that line, right? Not so much the strength of the line, but the diameter of the line. If you use a diameter that's really light and small, it's really good. All of these jigs are going to sink really fast, right? So having a little bit heavier line allows that jig to fall, but also allows some water to make a little bit of play on that line. So it allows me to swim my jigs through the water better and not have to reel so much, right? The thinner diameter, when you're using a 3/8 half ounce or even up to an ounce, I mean, any of these jigs, if you're using such a thin diameter line, they're going to sink really quick. And when they sink really quick, depending upon the water you're fishing, you're going to have to move that jig more frequently and faster to not have that jig on the bottom. And so using 30 for a while and going through a lot of jigs and having to do it, I tried 50. And 50 allowed my clients to cast, work their jig through the hole at a much nicer rate, and keeping the jig over in the zone longer than the thinner diameter, which means I have to work it faster and to keep it out of there, right? So I hope that kind of helps you understand a little bit why I think 50 is a more appropriate line for twitching.
I absolutely believe you. I know that as soon as you mentioned that to me a couple of years ago, every one of my twitching rod setups was switched out to 50 pound. Like I said, everyone, this is why we bring on the experts. I've done it, but that's why you like that heavier line. Hey, Bob, don't go anywhere. We've got to cut to a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about jigs, jig color, the weights, and why you would change from one weight to the next and one color scheme to the next, okay?
You got it.
All right, everyone stick with us here on KPTX. We'll be back with Bob Kratzer in just a couple minutes.
Outdoor GPS is brought to you by Chevy Silverado and the impressive new Turbo Max engine. Flex your muscle with the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever. Official truck of Outdoor GPS.